So we're going to continue a morning of excellence and people that really, really know what they're doing in the digital space. The next company started with a little bird whispering, twittering in someone's ear, and it grew to a new type of media, a new type of social movement that has toppled governments, warned of earthquakes, and entertained hundreds of millions. So I give the stage with a warm hand to Twitter's European brand director, Josh Grau.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me? Am I good? Great. Super excited to be here at the Sime conference. Last time I was in Stockholm was in 2002, and I said I would not return until I had a stage and hundreds of people who had to listen to me. So thank you for enabling my triumphant return to Stockholm. No, in all seriousness, it's great to be here, not just because this is an amazing event, but just about 4 weeks ago, we officially opened for business here in Sweden and in the Nordics. Along with our partners on the ground, Cell Branch, we're now working directly with brands and with agencies to help connect them more directly to consumers on the platform. So it's a really exciting time for this part of Europe, and it's great to be here and great to spend a couple of days and be here with you all today. So when Ola was briefing me on sort of what the event was and sort of challenging me to think a little bit differently, I give a lot of speeches across Europe and across the EMEA region, and I give kind of a general "this is Twitter" speech, which is great and creative and has a lot of great examples. But this was a great opportunity to sort of challenge my own thinking and share a little bit of a different perspective with you. So the name of my talk is "Constraint is the New Black." And I was thinking a lot about the idea of constraints. So we live in a world filled with constraints, particularly within digital marketing. It's a mobile-first world we're living in. We're sort of beholden to a very small screen. So we have literal constraints and then a lot of sort of figurative constraints, a lot of fragmentation, a lot of thought around, okay, how do we optimize for different platforms? How do we figure out how to connect with consumers who have smaller and smaller attention spans? So I really wanted to explore this a bit, and so I want to have a chat about this today. So hopefully you'll learn a few things and learn a lot about Twitter along the way, because I'll certainly share a lot of great Twitter stories. So to kind of kick things off, Twitter is certainly a platform all about scale. We've got a lot of impressive numbers. To share a couple, we have 284 million global active users. And we have 1 billion tweets that are registered on the platform every 2 days. So those are huge numbers. And that doesn't even include the tens of millions of people who are exposed to tweets on TV, across websites. Twitter has become really a critical piece of the fabric of storytelling. And so scale is something that we've seen sort of unfold in front of our eyes over the last several years, and it's quite amazing. We also describe Twitter as live, public, and conversational. So it's live, it's real time, it's public, it's totally open, it's conversational, it's inherently two-way. So the world's events are happening on Twitter. As Ola was saying, it's disrupting governments, it's alerting people to earthquakes. It really is doing things at great, massive scale, and we're really, really proud of that. But Twitter also has some constraints. And a lot of times when I'm talking with users, family members, agencies, brand marketers, they focus in on the constraints of Twitter. And we have 140 characters, and we're often asked, can't you make the tweet longer? We want to say more. And the reason why we don't is because when Twitter was founded in 2006, it was an SMS-based platform. And the international character limit for text messaging is 160. So we reserved 20 for your username and 140 for the content. And we've stuck with that because our goal is to reach every user on the planet in the most remote third world places where a very basic and cheap flip phone is all they have. And then we acquired a really fascinating video company about 1.5 years ago called Vine. And it's a 6-second video platform, 6-second looping platform. And they came up with 6 seconds because they did a lot of research, again, on attention spans of users, particularly through mobile. And they came up with 6 seconds as sort of the optimal time limit. So these are the constraints of Twitter, and we're not changing them. But sometimes they become barriers. And so in thinking about today's conference and what I wanted to say, I really wanted to kind of focus in on the idea of constraint. And so I started doing a bit of research, and I just looked up the definition of constraint. And you can see here, there's several definitions, but one that was at the top was stiffness of manner and inhibition in relations between people. And that sounds awful. And so I thought, there's got to be a better way to look at the idea of constraint, and I actually see it as a bit more freeing. I think that there is a complete half-full approach to the idea of constraint, and so that's what I want to talk with you about today. And in further doing some research around the topic, I came across a couple of articles about Igor Stravinsky, the Russian composer and pianist and conductor. And he said a lot of really great things, but one thing he said really stuck out to me, and it was, the more constraints one imposes, the more one frees oneself. And I said, that's it. And then I thought, it's such a shame that he was, not born a few generations later, because he would have been fantastic on Twitter. 64 characters. So then I started thinking about other things that have constraints that we consider art forms, so poetry. And I started thinking about the idea of a haiku. And to be successful in writing a haiku, you have to follow a very specific format. It's 3 lines, 5 syllables, then 7 syllables, then 5 syllables. And so I started thinking about Twitter in the context of a haiku, and I said, you know what, maybe Twitter is the social haiku because of the constraints that we put on our users and sort of force them to, sort of think differently about the way they communicate in a smaller setting in terms of the character limits. And so then I said, you know what, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to write a haiku. And this is the first time I've ever in my life written a haiku, but I did it just for you guys. So I hope you like it. So of course, in the form of a tweet, my haiku about constraint is, a little bird said, to say a lot is human, to edit divine. And so I think that that is completely true about Twitter. So we ask our users to essentially edit themselves, and when they do, it actually unlocks these amazing things. And so I really believe that constraint is a journey. And so I'd like to take you on a little bit of a storytelling journey, and I'm a big fan of alliteration, and so I'm going to talk with you about things in the theme of the letter C. So capability, community, consciousness, commerce, creativity, and conversation, and how constraint is actually enabling these things. And in a lot of these stories, there's actually 2 forms of constraint. There's the constraint that the subject matter that I'll talk about has brought, and there are the constraints of Twitter, and it's almost the idea of sort of 2 negatives making a positive. What these 2 things do when they come together is quite remarkable. So if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you a few really great stories where Twitter has really helped to unlock some of these great things. So first, the idea of constraint unlocking capability. So I want to tell you a story about one of our users, and I call this the football whisperer. So her name is Juliana Probst, and she's German, and she's an active blogger, and she's an active advocate of rights for people with disabilities. And she's also deaf. And a couple of years ago, she sort of became Twitter famous because she's a huge football fan. She loves the sport of soccer. And so she was watching all of the big games, all the big championship games, and whether she was there live or whether she was watching on TV, she was actually able to read the lips of the referees and read the lips of the players, and she was tweeting in real time what they were saying. And she went from having a few hundred followers to a few thousand to now over 30,000. And she does a lot on Twitter, but she still continues to do this. So here's someone who has a constraint. She's deaf, doesn't have an actual physical voice, but on Twitter, she has this amazing voice, and she was actually turning it into a capability and enlightening people and giving them a perspective of these football matches that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So next, the idea of constraint unlocking community. So, as I mentioned, Twitter is live, it's public, it's conversational, it's this great global platform, but there's really unique things that are happening at a local and sometimes a hyper-local level all over the world. So a couple of stories. So I call this Twitter Village. And this is a story about a guy called @Chief Karaoke. His name is Francis Karaoke, and he is the village chief of a small village in Kenya, about 22,000 people. And he uses Twitter to help the residents of this village with their problems. Now, their constraint is actually a poor physical constraint, fences. They have really bad fences. And so they have livestock, they have goats, they have cows, and often the fences are so poorly designed that these these animals go missing. So what he does is he communicates through Twitter with the residents of the village, and then he sends out messages like this: a black and white cow with a rope on the neck and small horns. And then he tweets out the person and their mobile number so they can get in touch. And he's actually helping to return livestock to their owners in this little remote village. And here's a quote from one of the residents of the village, who's also on Twitter, who says, "I am happy with Chief Karaoke after losing my 3 cows and got them after 2 hours." So Twitter is actually changing people's lives in this little tiny African village. Another story, I call this Twitter town. So it's not a village, it's actually more of a town. The infrastructure is a little bit more sound. And this is in the Granada region in Spain, and a town called Hun. And I'll introduce you to the mayor, Jose Antonio, who is obsessed with Twitter. He loves it. In fact, we had a huge event with him earlier this summer where he was essentially honoring Twitter in the town. And he requires everyone who works for the town, so the police, the firemen, engineers, to all have Twitter accounts. And their constraint is, of course, response time. So if you try and call or you try and email, typically there's a bit of a lag time. So he uses Twitter to really actually connect people to get help much, much faster. So a quick example of this, there was a resident who was taking a walk and noticed that there was a telephone pole that was damaged and had exposed wires close to where children were playing. It was nearby a playground. So this resident of Hun tweets to the mayor and reports it with a photo. The mayor immediately responds and copies in the engineer of Hun, who then goes out and fixes the problem and tweets to both the mayor and the concerned citizen a before and after picture of the broken telephone pole with the exposed wires and the fixed version. So that's what Twitter is doing. It's enabling people through this idea of 140 characters and a little bit of constraint. So next is the idea of constraint unlocking consciousness. So I'll tell you a couple of stories here. So the first I call Brain Man. And so this is a story about a guy called Thomas Dixon. And Thomas Dixon is an American, incredibly smart guy, member of Mensa, graduate student at Temple University studying educational psychology. And he's an avid runner. And one day he was going out for his morning run and he was struck by a car. And he was in a coma. He was in really, really bad shape. In fact, that's a photo of him when he was in the hospital. Well, good news is he made a miraculous physical recovery, but he did have a severe brain injury. Now, if you talk to him, he sounds completely normal. You can have a completely normal conversation, but his episodic memory is basically gone. But through therapy, he's able to slowly get it back, and Twitter is his therapy. So he actually has a private account. On Twitter, you can actually have a private account, so you all can actually go out and follow him. But what he does is every single day, he tweets every single thing that he does, who he's had lunch with, the phone calls he's made, different things that he was thinking about. He even tweets if he's had sex, hence it being private. But this is his way of actually restoring his memory. So Twitter is actually helping his constraint, his physical constraint, with the constraint of 140 characters. So the next thing within the idea of consciousness is the theme of Twitter and TV. So Twitter and TV have really become a hot topic of late, and we think that Twitter is such a natural fit with television. And so we're doing a lot of great things with television networks. We're partnering with the likes of Nielsen and Kantar to show that when big volume of conversation erupts around a TV show, it's actually causing people to tune in. But we wanted to look at some of the science of this. We wanted to actually determine, is Twitter actually enhancing the TV experience, or is it actually taking away? So is the constraint of Twitter actually causing more of a constraint? And so we ran some studies, and if you look at this video clip, you can just see footage of people who are tweeting while they're watching TV. And if you simply just use this for face value and looked at their eye movement and sort of where they were paying attention, you might say, gosh, if I'm working in TV, I would never want people to be tweeting while watching because all it's doing is taking them away from paying attention to what's going on air. Fair point. So we decided to actually do some real scientific experiments around that, and we did something in the US a few months ago, and we brought 2 cohorts of people into a room. And we put one cohort into a separate room without Twitter and let them watch a collegiate basketball game. If you're familiar with March Madness, it was one of the big playoff games, so really exciting. The other group got to go into the room and watch the same basketball game, but we didn't give them Twitter. So one group had Twitter, one group was denied Twitter. And we put a ton of different things on them. We put these special glasses on to monitor eye movement. We had things to measure their sweat glands, heart rate, pulse. Basically, they looked like a big science project. Because we wanted to understand, through interviews and actually through this data, if there was an actual effect for those who had Twitter and those who were denied Twitter. And sure enough, there were some pretty amazing results. So same game, same time, the group of people watching without Twitter, showed some emotional lists, but the people who had Twitter, either on their tablets, on their phones, on their laptops, had a higher overall emotional experience. Their heart was racing faster. They had a higher pulse. They were sweating more. They were simply more excited. So we're investing more into this kind of experimentation to really show that Twitter is actually enhancing consciousness, especially when it comes to the idea of Twitter and TV. So moving along more so in the business space, the idea of constraint unlocking commerce. And so another big investment that we've made is within big data. And so we acquired a company called GNIP, which is one of the leading companies in social media data and has access to our fire hose. And so we're really looking into how we can leverage that and how we can help marketers glean insights from the constrained 140 characters to make really important business decisions. And so we had a lot of different hypotheses, but until we heard this one story, this was the thing that really convinced us. So there's an actual manufacturer of deep fat fryers who are using Twitter data to make business opportunities. And so what they're doing is they are looking for tweets about soggy fries. So tweets like this: hate ordering fast food and not getting my food fresh, like bro, who wants to eat soggy fries? Now, they typically are looking for tweets in which they're accusing particular restaurants of having soggy fries, so I've protected the innocent for the purposes of this presentation, but they're looking for tweets like this, and they use the location and they use the information about what people are saying to then make a business call and say, hey restaurant, people are tweeting a lot about the fact that you have soggy fries. Guess what? It's time for you to replace your deep fat fryer. So for this medium-sized business to use tweets in aggregate, constrained 140-character tweets to make really profound business decisions and important transactions gives us an indication that we've got a really, really long runway when it comes to leveraging Twitter data to help marketers. So moving along to the idea of constraint unlocking creativity. This is a part of my everyday, working with marketers to really help solve their challenges, their sort of challenges within the context of constraint by using Twitter, by using Vine, by using all the things we bring to the table. So I'll show you a couple of examples. So the first thing I want to talk about is vacuums. Now, the big constraint that Samsung had here is marketing vacuum cleaners. I'm already bored talking about it. But they came to us, and they worked with our teams, and they said, help us be relevant. Help us make vacuum cleaners relevant in the context of cultural events. And so we worked with them, and we used the 6-second Vine platform, again, the constraint of 6 seconds, to create really creative, meaningful Vines to associate the vacuum cleaner with key events. So the first one you'll see, when your pet decides that hashtag orange is the new black, so while Orange is the New Black, the TV show was in its 2nd season, they ran this to, again, connect Samsung to the show. Recently, Halloween, when you scoff too many sweets on Halloween, and their campaign was called That Sucks. So they used a little bit of humor and a little bit of edginess to, again, be more relevant with consumers. And then during the Ryder Cup, missing that crucial Ryder Cup putt, hashtag That Sucks. So again, a really boring vacuum, a constraint, right? Something that you don't really want to talk about, yet you want to talk about this because it's so incredibly creative. Next example was Adidas and the World Cup. So Adidas, official sponsor of the World Cup, and a fantastic brand, of course. And so their constraint was that they have access to all these players, but they weren't able to access them during the game. And so what they did was they said, well, we're the official game ball sponsor, so what we're going to do is give a voice to the ball, the constraint of an inanimate object becoming the real voice of the World Cup. And it was a huge success. Over 3.2 million followers of this ball, and they tweeted out the journey of the ball throughout Rio. So you can see here I am wearing a disguise so I don't get recognized in Rio. I need to focus now. The world's watching Messi, but he only has eyes for me. And their overall campaign was called All In. But when this moment happened, during the Honduras versus France match on June 15th, it's the first time they were using goal line technology to really get to the bottom of disputes. They tweeted right away with, "Trust me, goal." And they changed it from all in to ball in. And that got over 16,000 retweets. So again, they used the constraint of Twitter and the constraint of dealing with an actual ball that has no voice to turn it into a magical campaign. And finally, constraint unlocks conversation. So I'm not going to say anything about this. I'm going to let the great actor Sir Patrick Stewart tell you a little story about something that happened earlier this year and how Twitter enabled a simple tweet that was about a serious subject matter to turn into a global, hilarious conversation.
I got this call from my wife saying, I've just seen this tweet, you must look at this right away. David Cameron tweeted a photograph of himself, holding a telephone to his ear and looking serious. The brilliant Rob Delaney tweeted a photograph of him with a tube of toothpaste in his hand instead of a telephone. So I looked around and there was a tube of wet wipes. Well, it exploded. I think there is a hunger for this in-the-moment excitement. It connects them to events. It connects them to people instantly.
And that was me at Ola's house last night. So I decided to join the conversation just a little bit late. So I'll leave you with one last quote from Harry Houdini, the great illusionist, the great stuntman, and probably the godfather of constraint. And he said, "My brain is the key that sets my mind free." And once again, he would have been great on Twitter. And so hopefully your mind has been set a little bit free, and I look forward to seeing what you all do when you use the idea of constraint to your great advantage. Thanks a lot.